In just 37 seconds, America's sweetheart Julia Roberts went from smiling guest to furious opponent, unleashing a verbal takedown on Whoopi Goldberg that left the entire studio in shocked silence. What started as simple questions about Hollywood quickly exploded into one of the most brutal confrontations ever seen on daytime television, with accusations flying, voices rising, and security eventually being called to handle what became an absolute disaster. The cameras were rolling when Julia Roberts walked onto the View set last night, waving to the audience with that famous smile everyone knows and loves. The crowd cheered loudly as she took her seat at the table, adjusting her microphone and getting comfortable. Whoopi Goldberg sat across from her, shuffling papers and preparing to start the conversation. The other host smiled and welcomed Julia, asking about her latest movie and how her kids were doing. Everything seemed normal and friendly at first. Julia talked about her new film, a drama about family relationships, and the audience listened carefully. She spoke about working with young actors and how much she enjoyed being back on set after taking some time off. Whoopi nodded along, but there was something in her expression that seemed a bit off, like she was waiting for the right moment to jump in with something else. The other hosts asked light questions about Julia's favorite scenes and what it was like working with the director. Then Whoopi leaned forward and changed the subject completely. "So, Julia, you've been pretty quiet about politics lately," Whoopi said, her voice taking on a sharper tone. "A lot of people noticed you didn't speak up about the healthcare bill that just passed. Why is that?" Julia's smile faded slightly, and she shifted in her seat. "Well, I think everyone has a right to their own opinions," she said carefully. "I don't always feel the need to broadcast every political thought I have." Whoopi's eyebrows went up. "But you have a platform," she pressed on. "Millions of people look up to you. Don't you think you have a responsibility to use your voice?" The tension in the room started to build. Julia's jaw tightened just a little bit, and her hands gripped the armrests of her chair. "I think people are smart enough to form their own opinions without celebrities telling them what to think," Julia replied, her voice still calm, but with an edge to it now. One of the other hosts tried to jump in and change the topic, but Whoopi kept going. "That's an interesting perspective," Whoopi said, but her tone made it clear she didn't really think it was interesting at all, especially coming from someone who's spoken out about issues before. "It seems like maybe you're just picking and choosing what's convenient for you." Julia's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me?" she said, sitting up straighter in her chair. "I've always been genuine about what I support. Just because I'm not shouting about every single issue doesn't mean I don't care." Whoopi laughed, but it wasn't a nice laugh. It was the kind of laugh that feels mean. Right, she said, waving her hand dismissively. "So you care, but not enough to actually say anything when it matters." "Got it." The audience had gone quiet now. You could feel the awkwardness spreading through the studio like someone had turned up the heat. Julia's face was starting to turn red, and her breathing had gotten faster. The other hosts looked at each other nervously, clearly unsure if they should interrupt or let this play out. "You know what, Whoopi?" Julia said, her voice getting louder. "I came here to talk about my film, not to be attacked for my personal choices about when and how I speak about politics. This is really inappropriate." Whoopi leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. "Oh, it's inappropriate now?" she shot back. "What's inappropriate is having a massive platform and being silent when people are suffering. But sure, let's talk about your movie, where you pretend to have problems." That last comment hit Julia like a slap. Her mouth dropped open slightly, and for a moment she just stared at Whoopi in disbelief. The other hosts tried again to step in, with one of them saying, "Hey, maybe we should take a breath here but Julia cut her off. "No, let her finish," Julia said, her eyes locked on Whoopi. "I want to hear what else she has to say about me, since apparently she's got it all figured out." Whoopi seemed almost pleased that she'd gotten under Julia's skin. "I'm just saying what a lot of people are thinking," Whoopi continued. "You Hollywood types love to show up, smile for the cameras, promote your projects, and then disappear when real issues need real voices. It's all very convenient, isn't it?" Julia's hands were shaking now, and her voice got even louder. "How dare you," she said, pointing her finger at Whoopi. "You don't know what I do with my time or my money. You don't know what causes I support privately. Who the hell do you think you are to sit there and judge me? The studio had gone completely silent except for Julia's voice echoing through the space. Even the camera operators seemed frozen, not sure if they should keep filming or stop. Whoopi's expression hardened, and she leaned forward again, getting closer to Julia. I'm someone who actually uses my voice, Whoopi said, her voice cold and cutting. I'm someone who doesn't hide behind excuses about privacy when people need help. That's who I am. Julia stood up suddenly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is unbelievable, she said, her voice shaking with anger. I agreed to come on this show as a favor, and this is how you treat your guests? By ambushing them and making them feel like garbage? Whoopi stayed seated but didn't back down at all. If you feel like garbage, maybe that's your conscience talking, she said with a shrug. I'm just asking questions that your fans deserve answers to. That pushed Julia over the edge completely. My fans? She practically shouted. My fans love and support me because they know who I am as a person. They don't need you trying to paint me as some selfish, uncaring person just to make yourself look better. The other hosts were trying desperately to calm things down now, with voices overlapping as they attempted to restore some kind of order. But it was too late. The conversation had gone way past the point where anyone could fix it. Julia pulled off her microphone and threw it down on the table with a loud thud. You know what your problem is, Whoopi? Julia said, her voice filled with fury. You think you're better than everyone else. You think your way is the only right way, and anyone who doesn't do exactly what you do is wrong. That's not being an activist. That's being a bully. Whoopi's face changed then, going from smug to genuinely angry. She stood up too, facing Julia across the table. A bully? She repeated, her voice rising. I'm a bully for holding people accountable? That's rich coming from someone who lives in a mansion and pretends the world's problems don't exist. Julia's hands clenched into fists at her sides. I never said problems don't exist, she yelled back. But I also don't go around attacking people on live television to make myself feel important. That's what you're doing right now, and it's disgusting. The audience gasped at that word. Some people looked shocked, others looked uncomfortable, and a few were pulling out their phones to record what was happening. The other hosts had stopped trying to intervene and were just sitting there with wide eyes, watching the disaster unfold. Disgusting? Whoopi repeated, her voice dripping with anger. You want to see disgusting? Disgusting is turning your back on people who need you. Disgusting is caring more about your image than about making a difference. Disgusting is coming on this show and acting like you're too good to answer basic questions. Julia grabbed her purse from beside her chair. I don't have to stand here and listen to this crap, she said, her voice breaking slightly with emotion. You've crossed every line there is, and you clearly don't have any respect for me or anyone else who doesn't bow down to your opinions. Whoopi threw her hands up in the air. There it is, she shouted. The real Julia Roberts. Can't handle a little pressure, so she runs away. Very brave, very inspiring. That sarcastic comment made Julia stop in her tracks. She turned back to face Whoopi, and her eyes were blazing with anger. You want to talk about brave? Julia said, her voice low and dangerous now. Brave is doing good work without needing everyone to know about it. Brave is not attacking people for internet clicks. Brave is definitely not whatever the hell this is. Whoopi stepped around the table, moving closer to Julia. This is called holding people accountable, she said firmly. Something you're clearly not used to. Poor little movie star can't handle being questioned. What a shock. Julia took a step toward Whoopi, and for a moment it looked like things might get physical. The other hosts jumped up from their seats, and you could see producers moving quickly from the sides of the studio. Someone yelled, "Cut to commercial!" But the cameras kept rolling. You're absolutely out of your mind, Julia said, shaking her head. This isn't about accountability. This is about you being nasty and mean because you can be. You've turned into exactly the kind of person you claim to stand against. Whoopi's face turned red. How dare you? She shouted. I have spent decades fighting for what's right. I don't need some actress who plays pretend for a living telling me who I am. Julia let out a harsh laugh. You're an actress too, Whoopi. Or did you forget that? The only difference is, I don't use my platform to tear other people down to build myself up. By this point, security guards had appeared at the edges of the set, waiting to see if they needed to physically separate the two women. The other hosts were trying to get between them, but Julia and Whoopi kept shouting over everyone's heads. "You're so full of it," Whoopi yelled. "You come here with your fake smile and your rehearsed answers, and when someone actually challenges you, you fall apart. Maybe you should stick to reading scripts, because clearly you can't handle real conversations." Julia's voice went up even louder. "Real conversations? You call this a real conversation? You ambushed me. You attacked me for no reason except to make yourself look tough in front of your audience. That's not conversation. That's bullying. And I won't stand for it." Whoopi moved even closer, and now they were practically face to face. "Then leave," she shouted. "If you can't handle the heat, get the hell out. Nobody's forcing you to stay here." Julia's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of pure rage. "Oh, I'm leaving," she said through gritted teeth. "But not because you told me to. I'm leaving because this show has become toxic, and you've become impossible. I feel sorry for anyone who has to work with you." That comment seemed to hurt Whoopi more than anything else Julia had said. Her expression changed, showing real anger mixed with something that looked almost like pain. "Get out then," Whoopi screamed, pointing toward the exit. "Go back to your perfect little life and pretend you're better than everyone. See if I care." Julia grabbed her purse tighter and started walking toward the exit, her heels clicking loudly on the studio floor. But she turned back one more time, unable to let Whoopi have the last word. "You used to be someone I respected," Julia said, her voice shaking. "You used to stand for something good. Now you're just angry and bitter, and you take it out on anyone who doesn't agree with you completely. It's really sad to watch." Whoopi took several steps toward Julia, and a security guard moved to block her path. "Sad?" Whoopi yelled. "I'll tell you what's sad. What's sad is watching privileged people like you pretend to care while doing nothing. What's sad is your fake concern and your empty words. That's what's actually sad." Julia was crying openly now, makeup running down her face. "I've had enough of this," she said, her voice barely controlled. "I came here to be a guest, not a punching bag for your issues. Whatever you're going through, Whoopi, it's not my fault, and I don't deserve to be treated like this." The other hosts finally managed to push their way between Julia and Whoopi, creating a physical barrier. One of them put a hand on Julia's shoulder and said something quietly, probably trying to calm her down or apologize. But Julia shook her head and pulled away. "No," Julia said firmly. "Don't apologize for her. She meant every word, and so did I. This is who she really is, and everyone watching now knows it." Whoopi tried to push past the hosts blocking her, but they held firm. "You don't know anything about me," she shouted at Julia's back. "You don't know what I've been through or what I fight for every single day. You just show up, look pretty, and collect your paycheck." Julia spun around one final time, and her face was a mix of hurt and fury. "And you just show up, tear people down and pretend it's activism," she shouted back. "At least I'm not a hypocrite who preaches kindness while treating people like garbage." That was apparently the final straw. Whoopi tried again to get around the hosts holding her back, and this time security had to physically restrain her. "Let me go!" Whoopi yelled at them. "She doesn't get to come into my house and disrespect me like that." Julia shook her head in disbelief. "Your house?" she said incredulously. "This is a television studio, Whoopi, not your personal kingdom where you get to treat people however you want. Wake up!" One of the producers rushed over to Julia and started urgently speaking to her, probably trying to convince her to stay or at least to calm down before leaving. But Julia wasn't having any of it. She held up her hand to stop the producer from talking. "I'm done," Julia said clearly. "I'm leaving, and I'm never coming back. You can air this or cut it or do whatever you want with it, but I won't be part of this show ever again." Whoopi was still being held back by security and hosts, but she managed to shout one more thing. "Good," she yelled. "We don't need people like you here anyway. Go back to Hollywood where everyone kisses your butt and tells you how wonderful you are." Julia stopped at the edge of the set and turned back one last time. "You know what, Whoopi?" she said, her voice tired now instead of angry. "I actually feel sorry for you. Because this anger, this need to attack people, it's eating you alive. And one day, you're going to look around and realize you've pushed away everyone who ever cared about you." With that, Julia Roberts walked off the set of The View, her heels echoing through the silent studio. The audience sat in stunned silence, not sure if they should clap or gasp or just stay quiet. Whoopi stood there, still being held by security and hosts, breathing heavily and looking furious. The cameras finally cut as Julia disappeared through the exit doors, leaving behind one of the most explosive confrontations in daytime television history. Whoopi pulled away from the people holding her and walked back to her chair, sitting down heavily. Her hands were shaking, and her face was still red with anger. Nobody knew quite what to say. The other hosts exchanged worried glances. The audience whispered nervously among themselves, and the production crew stood frozen, unsure what to do next. The damage was done, and there was no taking back what had just happened. One of the hosts tentatively said, "Maybe we should take a break." But her voice was so quiet, it barely carried across the set. Whoopi just sat there, staring at the spot where Julia had been standing moments before, her chest rising and falling with angry breaths. The stage manager came over and spoke quietly to Whoopi, probably asking if she was okay or if they should end the show early. Whoopi waved him away dismissively, but she didn't say anything. The silence was thick and uncomfortable, with everyone afraid to make it worse. From somewhere backstage, you could hear Julia's voice, still upset and talking rapidly to someone, probably venting about what had just happened. The sound carried through the studio, making everything feel even more tense and awkward. Some audience members started gathering their things, clearly ready to leave. Whoopi finally spoke, but her voice was hoarse. "Let's go to commercial," she said quietly to the crew. Nobody argued. The lights changed, and the tension in the studio remained thick as everyone tried to process what they'd just witnessed. The confrontation was over, but the impact of it would last much longer. Julia Roberts had been kicked off The View in the most dramatic way possible, and Whoopi Goldberg had revealed a side of herself that shocked everyone watching. It was a disaster from start to finish, and nobody involved would forget it anytime soon.